The courtroom was full, not because the case was exciting, but because of the man standing near the front. Quiet, calm, wearing a plain black coat, a wide-brimmed straw hat, and rough brown boots. He looked different. He wasn't like the others. No suit, no tie, no phone in his hand, no nervous shuffling. He was Amish. The judge noticed him the moment he walked in. The older man's slow steps, his eyes that didn't blink much, his face calm like a still lake. Some people in the room giggled quietly. A few lawyers whispered to each other. One said, "Looks like he took a wrong turn from the farm." Another replied, "Maybe he's lost." But the Amish man didn't flinch. He walked to the defendant's table and sat down beside a nervous young woman. She looked scared, clutching a worn-out folder with trembling hands. The judge, a sharp-tongued man in his 60s, tapped his gavel. "Let's begin," he said, without hiding his smirk. "I see the defense has chosen a rather unique representative today." The courtroom chuckled. The Amish man slowly stood. He nodded, his hands folded politely in front of him. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm here to speak on her behalf." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And who exactly are you?" The man spoke softly. "You may call me Elias." "Elias what?" the judge asked. "Just Elias," he replied. The prosecutor leaned toward his mic. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this man cannot represent the defendant unless he's a licensed attorney." The judge looked over his glasses. "Exactly my point." Elias nodded again. "Understand. I'm not here to break the law. I'm here because truth deserves to be heard, no matter who speaks it." The judge leaned back. "Well, that's poetic, but this is a court of law, not a barn." Laughter echoed through the room again, but Elias stood still, his face calm, not angry, not embarrassed, just patient. The young woman beside him looked down, tears forming in her eyes. "I don't have money for a lawyer," she whispered. "He offered to help me. I didn't know it would be like this." Elias gently placed his hand on hers. "Do not fear truth," he said. "It has a strange way of rising, even in dark places." The judge sighed. "Let's take a short break while we figure out if this man even belongs here." As the gavel came down again, people began whispering louder. Who was this man? Why was he here? And why did he seem so confident? What nobody knew was this: Elias wasn't just any Amish man. He was hiding something, something powerful, something no one in that courtroom was ready for. Outside the courtroom, people gathered in little circles. Some were texting, others were laughing. The courthouse hallway buzzed like a gossip hive. "He thinks this is a joke," a young man in a gray suit said. "What's next?" A cowboy defending someone in traffic court. "He's Amish," someone replied. "They don't even use electricity. What does he know about the law?" A woman in a pencil skirt chimed in. "Maybe he's just here to stall things. Delay the process." Typical country trick. But inside a quiet hallway corner, Elias stood silently, his hands behind his back, looking out the window. Rain tapped gently on the glass. The young woman, still sitting on a bench, finally broke the silence. "Elias, maybe you should go. This is embarrassing." He turned to her, soft eyes meeting hers. "You're afraid. That's natural, but you must not confuse laughter with truth. People mock what they don't understand." She wiped her cheek. "But the judge hates us. He hates what he assumes I am," Elias said. "Not what I truly am." The woman, her name was Leah, looked at him carefully. "You said you'd help, but you didn't say how." Elias took a small folded paper from his coat pocket. It was yellowed, worn at the corners. He handed it to her gently. She opened it. It was a legal license. Her eyes widened. "You're a lawyer?" "I was," he said. "Long ago." She blinked. "But the Amish don't become lawyers." Elias gave a faint smile. "The Amish don't lie either." He leaned closer and whispered, "Before I returned to the old ways, I was one of the best. Taught at Columbia. argued cases in D.C., but then I walked away. Back to silence. Back to truth. Leah just stared at him. But why? I realized something, Elias said. The world runs fast, but loses its way. I chose to slow down, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to live. Before she could reply, a courthouse officer walked over. We're starting again. They want you both back inside. Elias nodded politely. As they walked toward the courtroom doors, Leah leaned in. Why didn't you just tell them you were a lawyer? He looked ahead, his voice low. Because people learn more when they assume they know everything. The doors opened. Silence returned. All eyes turned toward the Amish man in the plain coat, who wasn't what he seemed. And the judge, smirking again, had no idea what was coming. The judge adjusted his glasses as Elias and Leah returned to the defendant's table. His smirk hadn't faded. Well, he said loudly, has the farmer found a pitchfork to defend his client? Laughter rippled again. Even the bailiff cracked a grin. But Elias didn't respond with words. He calmly sat down, opened a small, worn notebook, and began flipping pages. The judge tapped his gavel. Let me make myself clear. This is not a place for theatrics. I will not entertain some strange performance by a man dressed like he stepped out of a history book. Elias looked up. I understand, Your Honor. The judge raised an eyebrow. Do you now? Elias stood slowly, still holding the small notebook. Before we proceed, he said, I believe it's important to ask. Do you seek truth here or victory? The room froze. The judge's lips tightened. You're not in a position to question me. Then I ask only for permission to speak, Elias replied. Not as a licensed attorney, but as a man who has studied your laws longer than most in this room have practiced them. The prosecutor chuckled. Your Honor, if we allow this nonsense, we set a dangerous precedent. But before the judge could reply, Elias placed the folded paper, the legal license, on the table. The judge glanced at it. His smile disappeared. He leaned forward, eyes squinting. Is this real? Elias nodded. Bar number 417329. Graduated top of my class. Clerked under Justice Holloway. Worked with the Equal Justice Initiative. You may call to confirm if you wish. The room shifted. Faces changed. Whispers turned into silence. Even the prosecutor blinked. The judge slowly lifted the paper, examining it closely. How long ago? He asked. 15 years, Elias said. I left the world behind, but not what I learned from it. The judge cleared his throat. He wasn't smiling now. Well, that's unexpected. No, Your Honor, Elias said gently. It's inconvenient, not unexpected. The courtroom had turned cold. Elias walked to the center. All I ask, he said, looking around, is to speak for her. You can mock the way I dress. You can doubt the way I speak. But if truth still matters in this room, then let me share it. Even the judge paused. He looked at Leah, then back at Elias. Finally, he muttered, Fine, you may proceed, but make it quick. Elias gave a respectful nod. I will only speak as long as truth demands. He turned back to the jury, and as he did, something shifted in the air. The courtroom, once buzzing with judgment, now waited. Quiet. Still, Elias had stepped into the light, and no one, absolutely no one, was ready for what came next. Elias stood tall in front of the jury box. His boots scuffed against the polished courtroom floor. He looked at each juror one by one, not hurried, not scared, just calm. Leah, sitting behind him, watched silently. Her breathing slowed for the first time all day. Let me tell you a story, Elias began. Not one from law books, but from life. The judge sighed, but didn't stop him. There was a woman who worked 2 jobs. She cared for her sick mother, paid rent on time, followed rules. But one day, her landlord raised the rent without warning, broke the contract, told her to leave. Elias turned and nodded at Leah. She refused, not out of pride, but because she had nowhere else to go. And that's when the landlord, this man, Elias, pointed across the room to the prosecutor, filed charges, claimed she damaged property, accused her of stealing furniture. All lies. Also, he could win fast in court and make her disappear. The prosecutor jumped up. Objection. He's grandstanding. The judge held up a hand. Overruled. I want to hear this. Elias opened his notebook. Inside, every page was covered with tight, careful handwriting. I have photographs, he said, dated receipts, eyewitness notes, even recordings from neighbors who were threatened for speaking the truth. He walked over to the evidence table, pulled out a single page. Your Honor, he said, the landlord's lawyer submitted photos showing damage to the apartment. But here, he held up the page, are time-stamped maintenance reports proving the damage existed 3 weeks before Leah even moved in. He handed it to the judge. The judge scanned it. His eyebrows lifted. The jury leaned forward. Elias wasn't just telling a story. He was building something, brick by brick. And as for the furniture, Elias continued, this receipt shows Leah purchased every item with her own savings, months before the move-in date. He paused. Let's sink in. Then he walked toward the prosecutor. The room went silent. I read your filing, Elias said. You cited case law from 2019, Jefferson versus Holloway. But that case was overturned in 2021. You knew that, yet you used it. The prosecutor's face turned red. The judge looked up. Is that true? The man mumbled something, then went quiet. Elias turned back to the jury. You don't need to believe in me. You only need to believe in truth. And right now, that truth is that this young woman is innocent. The law was bent. The facts were twisted. And the people who did it counted on your silence. He stepped back. I chose a life of peace, of silence. But when injustice knocks, even a quiet man must answer. The judge leaned back slowly in his chair. The courtroom was frozen. Even clicking pens had stopped. No one was laughing now. And Elias? He was just getting started. Elias returned to the table, gently placing the notebook beside Leah. Her eyes were wide, lips parted like she'd forgotten how to breathe. You remembered all that? She whispered. He nodded slowly. Truth lives in details. The judge cleared his throat. I must admit, that was an impressive display of legal understanding. Mr. Elias. He hesitated on the name. But you're not currently licensed to practice. You realize that creates a legal complication. Elias replied, Yes, Your Honor. That's why I haven't filed motions or objected formally. I'm merely assisting her, as permitted by the court's discretion. No fee, no title, just one voice. The judge studied him. For a moment, he didn't speak, then finally continued. The prosecutor stood suddenly. Your Honor, may I remind you this entire show is designed to distract? The evidence is circumstantial. The lease was broken. The property was damaged. Let's not forget the facts here. Elias didn't flinch. He turned to the jury once again. Let's talk about facts. He pointed to a blurry photo projected on the court screen. This image was used to show damage to a wall. But look closely. There's a calendar behind it. He paused. Zoom in. Enhance it. A clerk followed his request. The calendar zoomed in on the screen. The date reads March. But Leah didn't move in until May. Gasps. Loud whispers now. The prosecutor's hands trembled slightly. Elias moved on. And the so-called witness who claimed Leah stole furniture? He's a cousin of the landlord. That fact was hidden, not disclosed. I found it buried in social media posts and business records. He held up a printout, a photo of the witness at a family barbecue, standing beside the landlord, holding matching mugs. The courtroom shifted again. The jury was no longer unsure. They were listening now, closely. The judge rubbed his forehead. You're doing something unusual here, Elias. Elias bowed his head slightly. I prefer unusual over unjust. It was a long pause. The prosecutor sat back down, his papers scattered, fingers nervously tapping the desk. Leah sat straighter now. She wasn't trembling anymore. And Elias? He stood quietly, not proud, not smug, just present, like a man who knew what storms felt like and had learned not to run from them. The judge leaned into his mic. I suggest we take a brief recess. When we return, we'll move to closing remarks. He glanced at Elias again. This time, there was no smirk, only curiosity and maybe a little respect. As the gavel tapped again, people began to rise. But no one looked at Elias with mockery anymore. They looked at him with wonder, because truth didn't need a shout. It only needed to stand. And that's exactly what Elias was doing. The courtroom emptied for recess, but no one really left the room completely, not mentally. Even in the hallway, people whispered. He destroyed the prosecutor with just a calendar photo. Did you see the way he found that witness's cousin connection? Who was this guy? Elias, however, sat alone on a wooden bench near the far corner. His hat rested on his lap. He looked out the window like he was counting clouds. Leah sat next to him, hugging her arms tightly around her chest. I don't understand how you knew all this, she said softly. You didn't even look nervous. Elias smiled gently. The world teaches people to speak fast, act fast, live fast. But I've learned that slow thinking often brings the clearest answers. She tilted her head. But how did you figure out what they were hiding? Elias looked at her. His voice was soft. When someone builds a lie, they leave fingerprints. Not on the walls, but in words, in what they hide, in what they rush. He paused, then added, I watched their eyes. Listen to what they didn't say. Leah stared at him for a long time. You're not just smart, she said. You're different. Elias chuckled. Where I come from, that word usually means trouble. The bailiff approached them. We'll resume in 5. Elias nodded and stood, slipping on his coat again. Before heading in, he turned to Leah. Whatever happens next, he said, you've already won. She looked confused. What do you mean? You faced them. You didn't run. And the truth is now in the open. Leah's eyes welled with tears. No one's ever fought for me before, she said quietly. Elias didn't answer. He simply placed his hat gently on his head and walked toward the courtroom. Inside, the air felt different now. The jury had returned. So had the judge, who now looked more thoughtful than arrogant. Even the prosecutor sat straighter, cautious now, as if he was up against someone he'd never studied for. Elias stood once again, hands folded in front of him, that same old notebook tucked under his arm. The judge cleared his throat. We'll now hear closing statements. Elias looked toward the jury, not with force, not with pride, but with calm strength. Then he began, not with facts, but with something much more powerful. A story. Elias stepped forward slowly. No notes in hand, no raised voice, just his presence, calm and rooted like an old oak tree. You've heard the facts, he began. You've seen the papers, the receipts, the mistakes. He paused. But I want to tell you something different now. A story, one you won't find in files. The courtroom leaned in. There was once a man, Elias said. He was poor, lived with his wife and daughter in a one-room cabin. Each night, he read by candlelight, not for fun, but to learn how the world worked, how laws were made, how power moved. One winter, he continued, his daughter became sick, very sick. The local doctor said she needed medicine, but the landlord had raised the rent. The man couldn't pay both, so the landlord gave him a choice, pay or leave. Elias paused. The man begged, offered to fix the fence, paint the barn, work through the night. But the landlord laughed. He took a breath. His voice grew quieter. So the man and his family left. In the snow, his daughter died 3 days later. The jury sat frozen. No one was punished, Elias said. No law was broken on paper, but deep down, everyone knew justice hadn't been done. He looked directly at the judge, then to the prosecutor, then finally at the jury. I tell you that story because it's still happening. In new buildings, in busy cities, behind fancy suits. He turned to Leah, who sat trembling again, but this time from emotion, not fear. This woman followed the rules, paid her bills, trusted her landlord, and when she stood up for herself, they didn't just try to evict her, they tried to erase her. Elias stepped closer to the jury box now. Your job isn't just to follow laws, he said softly. It's to understand why laws exist, to protect people, especially the quiet ones, especially those who are never heard. His eyes scanned the room. I didn't come here to win. I came here because silence, if it lasts too long, becomes permission. He stepped back slowly. That was all he said. No clever quote, no raised hand, just silence. And that silence was louder than anything. The judge didn't say a word. The jury didn't blink. And for the first time in that courtroom, truth didn't have to fight. It had already won the room. The judge leaned back slowly in his chair. His fingers tapped the bench. For a long moment, he didn't speak. No one did. Then finally, he nodded toward the jury box. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice quieter than usual, you may now retire to the jury room to begin deliberations. The bailiff stood. The 12 jurors filed out in silence. No side glances, no whispers, just focused expressions. Every one of them seemed changed somehow, as if Elias's story still echoed in their minds. As the door shut behind them, the judge turned to Elias. You've done something rare in this room, he said. You've made us feel. Elias said nothing, just nodded gently. The judge shifted in his seat. You speak like a man who's lost something. Elias looked at him, not with anger, but with something else. Wisdom. We've all lost something, Your Honor, he replied softly. But not all of us are brave enough to admit it. The judge didn't respond. He only stared. Across the aisle, the prosecutor sat like a man who'd just run into a brick wall. His notes lay untouched. His eyes, uncertain now, watched Elias closely. But he said nothing either. Leah sat still, her hands folded tight on her lap. Her face looked tired, but her posture had changed. She didn't hunch anymore. She looked straight ahead, breathing slowly. They waited. Minutes passed, and then, without warning, the jury door opened. Too soon, too fast. Everyone turned as the 12 jurors filed back in. Eyes sharp, heads high. They had made their decision. The judge looked surprised. You've reached a verdict? The foreman, a middle-aged woman in a red blouse, stood. Yes, Your Honor. Unanimous. The air in the courtroom turned heavy. The judge nodded. Please proceed. The woman cleared her throat. In the case of Leah Marston versus Harold Finch, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty on all charges. A gasp rippled across the room. Leah covered her mouth. Her eyes filled instantly. She turned toward Elias, her lips trembling, and whispered, We won. Elias nodded slowly. No, he said. Truth won. The judge banged the gavel. Court is adjourned. Chair scraped. Papers rustled, but Elias didn't move. He stood still, as if waiting for something more. And it came, because as people began to file out, one juror turned back. A young man, barely 30, paused by Elias. You were right, he said. Silence can become permission. Elias looked at him. Injustice, he said quietly, is when someone finally speaks. Outside the courthouse, the sky had turned gold. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows over the steps where people now gathered, not to watch Elias leave, but to try and understand him. A reporter shoved a microphone forward. Sir, are you really Amish? Or is this some kind of legal performance stunt? Elias smiled kindly. I am Amish. I live quietly. I raise animals. I fix tools. I read. But you're also a trained attorney? I was, he answered. Still am in knowledge, not in title. Another reporter asked, why didn't you tell the court right away who you really were? Elias adjusted his hat. Because it's not who you are on paper that matters. It's what you do when no one believes in you. They didn't know how to respond. Their cameras blinked. Their mics dropped slightly. Leah stood beside him, barely able to stop smiling through her tears. You saved me, she whispered. No, Elias replied softly. I reminded you that you were worth saving. He reached into his coat and handed her the notebook, the one full of his careful handwriting, every legal point, every fact. But this is yours, she said. No, Elias said. It was always for you. Then he stepped down the courthouse steps, boots steady on the pavement, and walked toward the road. But he didn't go unnoticed anymore. People moved aside as he passed. No one laughed now. No one mocked the hat or the clothes. Some nodded. Some simply stared. And the judge? He stood at the window upstairs, arms folded across his chest, watching Elias disappear into the sunset light. The prosecutor came up behind him. That man, he knew this court better than I ever will. The judge said nothing at first. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, he muttered, he knew something we forgot. What's that? The prosecutor asked. The judge didn't take his eyes off Elias's fading figure. That truth isn't always loud, he said. Sometimes it wears old boots and walks slowly. Back on the road, Elias stepped into his horse-drawn wagon. No car, no phone, just peace. As the wheels turned and dust lifted behind him, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had done what he came to do. And the world, whether it wanted to admit it or not, was just a little more honest because he walked through it. Days passed since the courtroom drama ended, but the story of Elias and Leah spread quietly, like a whisper through the town. Neighbors talked in hushed tones about the man in the straw hat who spoke truth louder than any lawyer in a suit. Some called him a hero. Others said he was a mystery. Leah returned to her apartment, now safe with her name cleared. She felt a strange new strength inside her, like the weight of fear had lifted. She kept Elias's notebook on her kitchen table. Every now and then, she would open it and read his notes. Not just legal facts, but words of wisdom about patience, courage, and faith. One morning, a letter arrived at Elias's farm. It was from the judge. The envelope was plain, but inside was a note written in careful, clear handwriting. Dear Elias, thank you for reminding this court, and me, what justice really means. I've learned that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it is quiet, steady, and unyielding. You showed us all what courage looks like. With respect, Judge William Harper. Elias smiled as he read. He folded the letter and placed it beside his old Bible. He looked outside at his fields, the tall grass swaying softly in the wind, the sun rising over the hills. He didn't need fame. He didn't want applause. He only wanted peace. Because sometimes the greatest victories are not in headlines or loud celebrations. They are in the quiet moments where truth wins, where justice is served, and where a simple man reminds the world how to be kind. And so, Elias returned to his life, simple, honest, and full of purpose. But everyone who heard his story knew one thing for sure. Justice may walk slowly, but it never walks away.